Hello and welcome to another unit by unit video. Today we look at the mighty grotesque flesh beasts of the Homunculi Covens. Let's begin. Hello and welcome to another unit by unit video here on SkaredCast. I'm Skari, your grateful host, and you have joined me here once again as we continue to take an in-depth look at the units of the Drukhari Codex. As you can tell, I'm rather excited. So, we're looking at the next unit, which is the Mighty Grotesque. Now, they are the flesh beasts of the Coven, and they are the main sort of flesh monsters that get unleashed. If you haven't watched one of these videos before, I like to dive in to a bit of the lore. We get to understand a bit more about the unit itself, and then we dive into how to use it in-game, its different options, and how you can kind of best use them. Of course, for more in-depth tactical looks at anything from obsessions to the Drukhari stratagems, you can take a look at the Patreon page, where I do a lot of exclusive tactical content for all you guys. So, let's begin, shall we? The Mighty Grotesques. To be honest, something that you should know is whenever I talk about a unit here on the channel, it's a unit that I've had experience with. I don't really like talking about things I haven't used, and I've pretty much used every unit in this codex in 8th edition Warhammer 40,000, which means I can talk about it from a practical perspective, not just a theoretical perspective. So, Grotesques. Towering and monstrous, Grotesques are insane creations that are employed when their homunculi masters have need to commit extreme physical violence. Pretty straightforward. The process by which a captive becomes a grotesque begins with a series of painful and humiliating body modifications. Drukhari are narcissists at heart, and the cruel homunculi take a sinister joy in distorting the flesh of those that have angered them. Their thick, muscled forearms are augmented with blades, toxin-dispensing gauntlets, and their hands are replaced with grasping claws or dripping tubes that can eject a great spray of the victim's own blood. On the march to battle, these meat hulks shamble forlornly after their macabre keepers, but when given the command to kill, they transform into engines of destruction. Racks of syringes depress in their spinal sumps to dump potent simulants into their ichostream. Ridged bellow pumps connect to primary lungs, wheeze and contract at triple speed, and veins throb near to bursting as tube-punctured hearts are forced into overdrive. A grotesque has plenty of pent-up aggression within its bruised and muscular frame, and it is not a good idea to be nearby when it is released. This is from the excerpt from the Codex. But it basically, grotesques are people or beasts or xenos or humans that the homunculi just don't care about. They basically alter them, turn them into big flesh monsters, and unleash them. They're like one-hit wonders. They have all these stim injectors and stuff, and as soon as the homunculi presses the button, they go into a rage, like a stim-fueled rage, and he just points it at something, and anything in that path just gets wrecked. So there's not a lot of tactical nuance to them in the lore. You just point and stim inject, and they just rush at the enemy, looking to destroy everything in their path. So, we have the general idea of what they can do, so let's dive right into their specific unit attributes. Now, Grotesques are one of my favorite units to use in-game. They are really tough, they do board control, they can kill hordes, they can kill monsters, they do okay against vehicles, So they're an all-rounder unit. They're on foot or relatively slow, but there are ways around their slowness, and they get some really cool special rules. So let's dive in, shall we? So Grotesque is essentially 35 points. It's power level 6, and it's 6 power level for 3 Grotesques. And a Grotesque has a 7-inch movement, has a 3+ ballistic skill and a 6+ weapon skill. Sorry, a 3-up weapon skill and a 6-up ballistic skill. My apologies. It has strength 5 and toughness 5, so pretty tough. They have 4 wounds each, 4 attacks each, leadership of 8, which is really good, and 6+ save, so no save to look about. They are infantry, so in cover they'd have a 5+ save. It's 3 Grotesques, and you can include up to 7 additional Grotesques for 2 power level per model. Each model is armed with a monstrous cleaver and a flesh gauntlet. Essentially 35 points for the flesh, so with that included, right, it comes up to those points. Really good for the point value. I really feel they should be about 5 to 6 points more expensive for what you get, but 4 wounds, that's a huge jump from what they were in the index, which was 3 wounds. And the weapons themselves are not bad. The monstrous cleaver is the most basic weapon. It's a strength melee weapon, a strength user. It is AP -2, which is pretty standard, 1 damage, and when you attack, you can make an additional attack with weapons. So if they're using their monstrous cleavers, or they always get an additional attack with their monstrous cleaver. Cool. So essentially, a Grotesque has 5 attacks, not 4. The other weapon they have is called the Flesh Gauntlet. Now this is another melee weapon. It's strength of users, so they are strength 5, and they're only damage 1 and 0 AP. But every time you roll the wound roll of a 6+, not against a vehicle, this weapon does not work against vehicles, they suffer a mortal wound in addition to any other damage. This is really useful. A 6+ to wound, that's a mortal wound on a 6+. That works against anything that's not a vehicle. So monstrous creatures, monsters, primarchs, heavy infantry with invulnerable saves, regular infantry with invulnerable saves. It's a great way to get through someone who has a good armor save or good invulnerable save and even a high toughness, because on a 6 to wound, you're getting mortal wounds off. Works fantastically with the stratagem of that allows you to reroll wounds for a coven unit. So you're walking in, hitting on 3s in combat, wounding on 3s normally because they're strength 5 against, or 4s or 5s, or maybe 5s even, so anywhere from 3s to 5s to wound, re-rolling with a stratagem, any 6s are mortal wounds, and they get an additional attack with a monstrous cleaver. So put this hand in hand, got a very versatile close combat unit that can deal with hordes, can deal with lightly armored infantry with -1, a -2 to their armor saves, or can deal with heavily armored infantry or monsters like primarchs or things like that with the ability to do mortal wounds, which is, you shouldn't understate. That is very, very powerful. Now, it can't be used against vehicles, so they're not as useful against things like knights or tanks, but their volume of attacks means that they will do some damage. With a minus, I would recommend the cleaver for that. That's -2 to the opponent's saves. So let's take a look at their options. Any model may replace its cleaver with a liquefy gun. So, the liquefy gun is a 8-inch flamer that is assault D6. It is strength 3, AP D3, damage 1. And that's it. It automatically hits its target, so it's a flamer, and it's strength 3, and it's D3 damage, minus D3 AP, and 1 damage. To be honest, you know, it's not worth it in my opinion. I think unless they get an FAQ and drop the points considerably of the liquefy gun, it's really expensive for like 11 points for like a strength 3 flamer. Not something I would recommend. Yeah, so that's just my personal opinion on the matter. And that's it. That's the only option. If you wanted to give all of them liquefy guns, you can. Just run a bunch of them with liquefy guns. But strength 3 flamer, it's very situational. Unless your opponents always play Imperial Guard or toughness 3 models, then maybe it could be useful. Abilities are Power from Pain. just like any other Drukhari unit, on turn 1, they get a 6+ feel no pain, which is fantastic. On turn 2, they get to reroll advance and charge ranges, which is great, especially if you're putting them in a webway portal, and you can then teleport within 9 and then have a reroll charge, which makes it more reliable. They also, turn 3, get +1 to hit in close combat, so their weapon skill 3+ technically becomes weapon skill 2+. That's fantastic for the amount of attacks they have. On a turn 4, they become fearless, which is really handy if you don't want them to run away, if you have a big unit of them. And on turn 5, any enemy unit within 6 inches has a -1 to their leadership. Now this can stack with things like the Phantasm Grenade Launcher, or the Coven that does negative modifiers, and Hemlock Wraith Fighters from the Eldari, and Harlequin modifiers to leadership, so that's kind of handy. And the last ability they have is Insensible to Pain, which gives them a 5+ invulnerable save. Quite handy. Prophets of Flesh makes that a 4+. Hint, hint, my absolute favorite to give them a 4+ invulnerable save. And that's it. Other than that, faction keywords. They have Eldari, Drukhari, and their Homunculus Coven unit, and their keywords are Infantry and Grotesques. So how to best use Grotesques in game? I usually use them as a giant wall, and they just kind of screen the rest of my army. You jump them up, they kind of walk up, and a Homunculus behind them will give them +1 toughness within 6 inches. Therefore, they become toughness 6. This makes them almost, they basically don't even care about strength 10 weapons. Means that you have to have strength 12 weapons to wound them on a 2+. Their 4 wounds makes multiple damage weapons, things like D3 damage and 2 damage, a lot less effective because of the way that you allocate wounds. So if you say have an autocannon that has 2 damage, and you take 3 wounds from an autocannon unit on a unit of Grotesques, you would allocate the first 2 unfailed saves or failed saves to 1 Grotesque. So that's 2 damage a pop from 2 wounds. That's 2 damage. That's 4 damage on 1 Grotesque. Then you would roll Feel No Pains for those 4 dice, right? So 4 dice, you'd roll Feel No Pains for all of those. And if any of those is a 6, it can soak up the last wound that will then be an extra 2 damage. So it will really kill 1 Grotesque, but it means that you only suffer damage on 1 Grotesque. So order of operations with things like multiple damage weapons and things like that are very important for units like Grotesques, and a savvy player will understand this and will not rush through the damage dealing phase after failing saves. You'll take the time to allocate the weapons appropriately, take your Feel No Pains from Power from Pain, and really try and mitigate the amount of damage that the enemy will do to you, essentially changing the efficiency of their shots. And Grotesques work great for this. They're a great disruptor unit. I usually run them in units of 6, but my second favorite is units of 4 to put them in a raider, and then the raider be able to move, and then they are inside and basically get them to the point of the battlefield without getting shot. Now, I've seen online competitive players running a giant unit of 9. Now, this is great. It's very hard to get rid of a unit of 9. It's about 300 and some points. But they will do work as long as they don't flee. So keep a couple of stratagem points to keep them around with a morale boost until turn 4. Now, if you do a grot bomb, it's highly recommendable to put them in the webway and teleport them where you need them, turn 2 outside of your deployment zone, or turn 1 in your deployment zone, to stop the enemy from knowing where you're going to be putting this giant death blob. So, let me know what you think about Grotesques. Have you used them? I think they're fantastic. I love the ability to choose either mortal wounds or regular damage. And the amount of attacks they do just makes them very versatile. They're fast with the reroll, advance and charge ranges starting on turn 2. And after turn 3 with the +1 to hit, that volume of attacks will come in handy. Favorite stratagem to use with them is the reroll wound stratagem with the Coven. It's 2 command points, reroll to wound in combat, making it a lot more likely to get that 6+ to do mortal wounds against the enemy, or to just put a volume of attacks and wounds. My favorite obsession to use with them is the Prophets of Flesh obsession to give them a 4+ invulnerable save. My next favorite would be the Covenant of 12, which would allow you to do -1 AP on all their close combat attacks. So it'd be -3 AP or -1 AP for the Flesh Gauntlet. I'm excited to hear, did I get that right? You know, if you have a different opinion, leave a comment down below. This is Skari, your grateful host, and join us in the next unit by unit video. A huge shout out to all the Patreons, the denizens of the Dark City. You guys are awesome. If you would like to unlock some cool content by supporting me on Patreon, the link is down below. After all, I'm Skari, your grateful host, signing off until next time. Skari out.